The time for this debate has expired. I call on Government Orders of the Day number 1 to 3.
Taxation, Kiwisaver, Homestart and Remedial Matters Bill, Committee Stage. Social Security Amendment Bill number 3, Committee Stage. Immigration Amendment Bill number 2, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Taxation, Kiwisaver, Homestart and Remedial Matters Bill, the Social Security Amendment Bill number 3 and the Immigration Amendment Bill number 2. Mr Chairman. Speak.
The House is in committee on the Taxation, Kiwisaver, Homestart and Remedial Matters Bill, the Social Security Amendment Bill number 3 and the Immigration Amendment Bill number 2. Members, we come first to the Taxation, Kiwisaver, Homestart and Remedial Matters Bill. I call Tim McIndoe.
Chairman, I seek leave for debate on the bills that we're about to commence to be taken as one debate with the clauses to be voted upon separately.
Leave is put for that purpose. Is there any objection? The question is that clauses 1 to 11 stand part. I call Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We look forward to debating this bill through the committee stages taken as one. And I want to just begin some comments, sir, speaking to clause 6 of the bill, which is the operative clause for what I think is the most significant thing that the bill sets out to do, and that's to enable members of Kiwisaver schemes to withdraw not only their own contributions, but also the member tax credit or the government contributions in a Kiwisaver scheme, in order to get a deposit together that would enable them to take advantage of a welcome home loan. And so this policy, or I should say this bill, is an enabler of the government's Homestart subsidies that were announced during last year's general election campaign. So we're going to focus our discussion this afternoon on the clauses in this bill, but just let me note in passing that members on this side of the House, Labor members particularly, have been very critical of the policy for which this bill is an enabler. And if I can just summarise briefly our criticisms, we agree with many of the highly critical things that have been said by the Reserve Bank, by Treasury and so on, about the effect of increasing home ownership subsidies in a market that is already supply constrained, where there's already significant excess demand compared to supply. And many commentators, including the officials from MB, Treasury and Reserve Bank and the officials that briefed the Select Committee, were clear that those were the problems associated with this bill. We are, as we've made clear in earlier debates, Labor's going to be voting for this bill because the bill itself, putting aside the Homestart policy and the expansion of homeowner subsidies that we think will drive prices up and actually make housing more unaffordable, putting aside that for a second, this bill is at best, I suppose, slightly benign. But as I was saying, clause 6, sir, is the one that basically amends the Kiwisaver scheme rules. And I suppose the question in relation to clause 6 is, what difference is it going to make to aspiring home owners, first home buyers? And our calculations are that at best it will allow possibly a couple of thousand, maybe a few thousand extra dollars to be contributed to a deposit. Now, when you put that in the context of what's happening, for example, in the Auckland housing market, where last year, over the last 12 months, the average house price increased on average by $1,700 every week. $1,700 every week. So a bill that's going to enable people to add just a few $1,000s of their own retirement savings. So this bill gives people the opportunity to raid their own kitty to really pay the price of this government's failure to address the housing crisis. But the quantum is all wrong. So at best it's going to allow people to withdraw a few $1,000s extra. It might be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the equivalent of 2 or 3 weeks Auckland house price inflation. And I think that puts it in perspective. That shows how incremental, how marginal the benefit from this bill, Sir, will be. And I wanted to, Sir, point to some of the comments that have been made by officials in relation to the expansion of the subsidies and including the ability to withdraw one's own retirement savings to put a deposit together. So Treasury advised the government in July last year that in terms of the earlier eligibility, in July 2013, about the earlier change to the rules around eligibility for the Kiwisaver home deposit scheme, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Phil Twyford.
And Treasury said that the Kiwisaver home deposit scheme increases the cash available to home buyers for deposits. Increasing the eligibility may encourage buyers to take on more debt and seek more expensive houses, and this could exacerbate house price pressures. That's what we're talking about here. Later that month, they advised that the impact of increasing Kiwisaver withdrawal subsidies would have an impact on the very same financial and macro stability issues that the Reserve Bank Governor comments on almost a weekly basis. And Treasury said that the impact on financial stability would be negative, that it will undermine the effectiveness of loan-to-value ratio lending restrictions. So it's the main tool that the Reserve Bank's brought in to try to reduce the financial stability risks of an out-of-control Auckland housing market. They said government subsidies for home ownership are low value for money and tend to be regressive. And this is advice that Treasury's given elsewhere. They are low value for money and they tend to be regressive. So by raising the price caps, increasing the subsidies and the eligibility, they're actually reducing the targeting, the value of the policy to make a difference to people who need it most, and they're making it, expanding the pool of people who are likely to take it up. On the draft cabinet paper, again on the previous changes, but I think they are just as apposite for this bill, Sir. They said experience with home ownership grants in Australia suggests that such programs tend to push prices up in a supply-constrained environment by supporting greater demand rather than improving affordability. And there's a risk that by expanding eligibility, as this bill does and as the wider policy does, for the Kiwisaver deposit subsidy, the government will end up undermining affordability for first home buyers. So I think that's a pretty good summary there, Sir, of the official advice about the implications of Clause 6, which allows the member tax credit or the government contribution to be withdrawn. And Sir, I think it's pretty clear that the benefit here is very, very small. And compared to what's happening to house prices, $1,700 a week in Auckland, but the median house price for the whole of New Zealand is about, over the last 12 months, has been going up $1,000 a week on average, $1,000 a week. So the benefit of this bill to the aspiring first home buyers is pretty marginal and is probably the equivalent of about 2 or 3 weeks house price inflation. Thank you, sir.
I call Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to take a brief call